This is Jerry Barrett talking. Today's date is March 26, 1986. I'm interviewing Captain Robert Shipner at the Eastern Airlines headquarters in Miami. Captain Shipner, if you would, why don't you talk just briefly about what you did before you came with Eastern?
Before I came with
Yes.
Eastern?
Yeah.
Well, I've had a varied and interesting background before I came with Eastern, as I see it anyway. Of course, after school and after the United States Navy, I was in show business. I was a vocalist and a musician, and I worked around the country in various theaters and nightclubs and things of that sort, concerts. And then I began my flying career and started flying for corporations. And of course, I had started flying at age 14 and had my commercial and instrument rating at a very early age. But I kind of put flying on the back burner for the music. And then when I discovered that music was really kind of a tough way to go, I decided to go into what was really a tie for my first love, and that's flying. And I've been flying ever since. Flew for corporations, as I said, and then came with Eastern in 1957. So that basically is what I did.
Okay. So in 57 you came with them. And were you based mostly in Chicago?
Yes, I was based in Chicago starting in 1957 and have been based there ever since, with the exception of 1 year that I was based in Atlanta when I first started flying captain about 20 years ago, and then the last 18 months here in Miami. Other than that, I've been in Chicago.
Okay. Before you held executive positions with Eastern, you were a pilot and active in ALPA?
Yes, and I was also the chief pilot in Chicago. I held a management position in Chicago in 1975 and part of 76. For my entire career, I've been active in ALPA. I was council chairman twice in Chicago, and I've been the, I guess you might say, the perennial committee chairman of the Professional Standards Committee in Chicago for ALPA.
Okay.
I was also regional public relations director for ALPA National when they used to be regionalized. They had, I think, 5 regions, and I think I was in region 4, 3 or 4. It's not important, but in any case, I was the regional public relations director under the regional vice president.
Before we talk about your current job, could you talk a little bit about ALPA, sort of as an organization, how it functions?
Well, ALPA is an organization like most unions. First of all, they just recently started calling it a union. In years gone by, it was always an association, and people were reluctant, pilots were reluctant to refer to it as a union specifically. However, that attitude seems to have changed over the last few years, particularly since deregulation, when the pilot's career is in more jeopardy than it's ever been in the history of the industry. And it's a very democratic organization. Everything stems from the grassroots, and of course they have the same problem that most unions have, and that is that a very small cadre of people actually are active and run the union, and the other people suffer from a little abject uninterest. They're not interested in being active. So as a result, sometimes the union and its motives can be misinterpreted because of the fact that the majority frequently simply ignores what's going on, and a very small, vocal, sometimes militant minority kind of takes over. Fortunately, it seems as though pilots who are normally conservatives, normally not union-oriented, normally company-oriented types, because they have a lot to lose if the company goes down. Usually they step in the nick of time when the crazies, as I call them, take over. They step in and they kind of moderate things. They kind of cut the crazies off at the pass, so to speak.
There must be a problem with just the fact that when you're working or when you're not working, you're spread all over the place. It must be harder to have the kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, camaraderie or direct communication with them?
With the union?
Yes, within the union. Yeah.
Well, communications is not a problem. As a matter of fact, this last crisis that we went through, I was very surprised. Not only surprised, but I was pleased, because I've often said, as a member of management, that I would much rather deal with a strong, cohesive, well-directed unit than I would a bunch of ragtags that maybe the lunatic fringe have taken over. If you get the interest, and you get the interest of the majority, it's going to reflect the attitudes of the majority. And if the union reflects the attitudes of the majority, it'll be a much more moderate stance than if it reflects the attitudes of a few militant leaders. Mm-hmm. So in this last crisis that we had, this last contract negotiation that we had with ALPA, they spent a lot of money and a lot of effort and time in establishing very, very effective communications links. And matter of fact, I even wrote to the chairman of the Eastern element of ALPA and congratulated him on his accomplishments, he and his people. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's to the advantage of the union, certainly, and to the advantage of the company. But what they did was they included the families of the people. Mm. Consequently, if a pilot was out of town and there was a message to deliver to everyone, the telephone committees cranked up, and if a pilot's wife answered, or husband, as the case may be, answered, the message always got to the pilot. Okay. So it's not really a big problem, the fact that they are spread out. And additionally, in our particular system, when a pilot's flying, normally at one point in time he'll be going through Atlanta. So Atlanta is a very important cog in a communications network. And anytime you go through Atlanta, the first thing a pilot does is run down and read the ALPA bulletin board to see what's going on. See? Okay. So communications aren't quite as difficult as it might seem.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about the kind of the series of crises or problems that begin in the 70s, and from whatever perspective you happen to be in at the point where it happened?
Well, to me, the position that you hold within the company, whether it be in the association or the union, or whether it be in management, it really has not changed my attitude a great deal, for the simple reason that I, like most pilots, recognize that my livelihood is Eastern Airlines. My check comes from the company, and consequently, I've never had a problem with becoming a company hater. Like some of the very militant people, they just absolutely, for whatever reason, they decide that they just despise the company and management and everybody else. Mm-hmm. And but the thinking, reasonable pilot, which I like to consider myself in that group, recognizes that the company is all important, that the survival of the company is important, and that really, whenever I was an ALPA representative, I always felt as though I too, like a management person, I too was a businessman. And when we were making decisions, I always tried to make a decision based on prudent business principles. And I never tried to, while I was as I think as tough a union representative as anyone else, I always tried to be reasonable. And we got some very, very good contracts, and we did some knockdown, drag-out fighting for it. But at the time, it appeared to me, at least as a member of the union, that the company could afford what we were asking for. Now, since deregulation, that situation has changed, because in the old days, when we negotiated contracts, if the company was a little light on being able to pay, all they had to do was jack up their prices, because we had franchise routes, and the competition usually was in the same boat. Their pilots, their labor unions were asking the same thing we were, and so everybody would jack their prices up. But now it's a different ballgame. Now you have non-union airlines, you have a deregulated environment, you have non-franchise routes. You don't have a situation where the company can react to their economic needs by raising ticket prices. In order to stay in the market, you have to be competitive price-wise, and in order to do that, your yields have to go down, and or it's automatic that they're going to go down, and so you have to temper your demands based on the realities of the marketplace. So, as I say, as a union representative, I really never felt much differently than I do now as a management person. I always tried to look at the overall picture. What can the company afford? Am I asking for too much? Are they not offering enough? That sort of thing. In other words, I always try to take a business approach to it. As I say, sometimes we wound up in knockdown drag-outs because there has always been a credibility gap between labor and management in this airline for some reason. And I don't think that's unique in the industry, but it seems to be a little more prevalent in this corporation. And I don't know the answer as to why.
And having been on both sides, you still don't understand it any better than that, other than that there is.
No, and particularly this time when we went through the last fiasco, I was in probably the most unique position in the corporation, for the simple reason that I had become quite friendly with the management people that I work with, my peer group in management. Obviously, I'm well aware of the pilots' attitudes. That's my peer group also. So I was in the middle of a controversy wherein I felt as though I was on the peak of a hill, and I could see down both sides. I could see the pilot's position. I could see where they were coming from. I could look the other way. I could see management's position and what they were trying to accomplish and where they were coming from. While both sides were accusing each other of a lack of integrity, a lack of realistic approaches to doing things, and so on, I could see where the misunderstandings were just blatant. And the only thing that I could not do is come up with a piece of the puzzle to put it all together, because if you can ever get unions, or labor I should say, if you can get labor and management together, you can accomplish more by virtue of giving labor an absolute maximum benefit, and you can give management an opportunity to make a profit. So what I'm saying is that what I have discovered, having been a labor-oriented management person, is that through cooperation, more can be had by all concerned, you see. Because you get into the confrontations, and pretty soon both sides, management has to go to give the minimum, and the labor has to go to get the maximum, and somewhere in between you compromise. But sometimes a compromise isn't as good as what you could get if you could sit down and say, all right, now you show me what you can do for me, if you're on the labor side, and then I'll tell you what I can do for you. And if you do it that way, I am absolutely convinced in my own mind that if you do it that way, the labor will come out better and management will come out better. Because I think there's a lot of merit in programs that that cannot be defined and put down in so many words. In other words, I think there's a lot of merit saying, look, if we can try this and we can cooperate in this regard, and if it works out successfully, you'll get what you're entitled to, and we'll get ours. So I think there's a lot of merit in that type of approach to doing business between labor and management. The confrontational approach to me does not work.
I'm really struck by by your reference to the fact that many, if not most, pilots think like business people. How do you account for that? Is it? I would say on average they probably have more formal training than formal education than probably other bargaining units here at Eastern, for example. Is that a part of it, or is it something else?
Well, I think there are a number of factors. That's part of it. The fact that on the whole, I would say that pilots are better educated. They seem to be more motivated toward making money, and as a result of the amount of money that they do make from their piloting profession, they usually have extra money to be in business, to go into other businesses and things of that sort. But I think also one of their motivations and why they're more company-oriented maybe than somebody else is the fact that a pilot's job is unique in that you can't jump from company to company to company. First of all, age becomes a very critical factor once you get beyond the age of 30 or so in the piloting profession. Once you're beyond 30, it becomes more and more difficult to acquire a job, and particularly an airline job. Because the airlines, the amount of money that they invest in you in training becomes very critical, and it's very significant in the initial training phases of your career when you're checking out in various seats in various airplanes, and the company really has to have you around for quite a few years in order to get their money's worth, so to speak, to get their money out of you, the money that they have invested in your training. Additionally, with the retirement programs that we have, which are quite significant, a short career costs the company a lot of money in funding of minimum retirement benefits. And the longer your career, the less the company has to fund. The shorter your career, the more money the company has to come up with to bring you up to the minimums in the retirement program. That's just the way it's written.
Okay.
But I think pilots are more cognizant of the company's problems because the fact that it just simply is not as easy for them to jump from company to company to company, whereas you take a mechanic or something like that, a good mechanic can get a job in any number of companies at almost the same money he was making in his previous job. Sometimes he can even better himself. That's not true with a pilot. Plus the fact that in the pilot occupation, seniority is all important.
Oh, yes.
And you just don't, like if you're a captain on Eastern, you could not take your captain skills and go to your American or United and hire on as a captain. You start at the very bottom of the list again.
Okay.
So that's why it's important for a pilot to make sure that his company survives, because he's got a lot at stake. Excuse me.
You talked a little bit about the impact of deregulation. One other thing that several people have mentioned to me as having had quite an impact on the industry as well as on Eastern is the air traffic controllers strike in the early '80s and the replacement of them, and then the slowing down somewhat of the air traffic system. Do you see that as having very much impact?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, and I'm not cognizant of all the various statistics and so on. I've read all the criticisms of the air traffic system now as compared to before, but I have to tell you, as a pilot, the air traffic system prior to the PATCO strike was pretty bad as far as delays and circuitous routings and particularly as far as the relationship between the controllers and the pilots were concerned. The controllers were very unhappy in their job, and it showed in their job performance. And frequently you would get isolated slowdowns You'd get one in New York, you'd get one at O'Hare, you'd get one in Miami, you'd get one wherever, you'd get one in the center. And these slowdowns had tremendous negative effect on the airlines. And so something had to give. When the PATCO strike came about, I think that 99 out of 100 pilots supported President Reagan in insisting that controllers, as any other citizen, obey the law. And when a controller takes his job, he signs a commitment that says that he, as a government worker, he gives up his right to strike, and that it would be illegal for him to participate in a strike. Well, they went ahead with this illegal strike. President Reagan gave him adequate warning. As a matter of fact, I have inside knowledge in my conversations with some people wherein the Department of Transportation secretary suggested that President Reagan just give him 24 hours notice and say, if you're not back to work in 24 hours, you're gone. And Reagan insisted that he wanted to give them more than adequate notice, and he gave them 48 hours. I think that any controller who did not come back to work when the President of the United States says, gentlemen, you have 48 hours to come back to work, and then they just absolutely ignored that warning, they deserve to lose their job, because they obviously had been sold a bill of goods by Robert Poli, who nobody ever hears of anymore. But in any case, they were on an illegal strike. They could have probably gotten their demands much more readily by staying at work and working from within, but they chose to do it another way. In any case, when they went out on strike and the 48-hour thing passed and most of them didn't come back, the ones that had come back, in addition to some retirees that they brought back, in addition to other controllers that they brought back into the system, while the system was certainly, the capacity was certainly reduced, it was much more efficient, it was much more friendly, it was much more conscientious than it was before they went out. Now, obviously the capacity was the problem. It hurt the airlines, it hurt Eastern Airlines severely. The capacity problem has slowly got back to a realistic proportion. Where are we now? I think that we're better off now than we were then. I think that the mistake, in my opinion, is this. It is an unenlightened management in the government, unenlightened to the extent that the controllers do have problems, as they did before PATCO went out on strike. They have severe manpower problems, they have severe budgetary problems, and the unenlightened management within the FAA simply will not address the problems. And they're building toward another crisis, in my opinion. But as far as is the system safe, I say it is as safe now as it was before PATCO went on strike, if not safer.
Okay.
Okay?
Can you talk a little bit about prior to deregulation, the wage freeze in '76? How did it come about? What were the circumstances of it, and so forth?
Well, it starts way before '76. Okay. Having been involved in ALPA basically throughout my entire career since shortly after 1957, I remember I'll go back as far as, well, first of all, when I first came with this company, this was the strongest company economically in the industry. Eastern Airlines had made money consistently from 1934 to 1960. Rickenbacker was a good businessman. He was tough. He was fair. I have a great respect for his memories. He ran a good airline. And but 1960, when he lost the ball, we got into the situation where, for a number of reasons, not all of which were management's fault, the current management, let's say, current meaning 1960. For a number of reasons, Eastern kind of fell down the economic ladder. Competition improved, and at that time we were very much controlled by the CAB, and the CAB continually put competition on our routes without giving us anything. Their theory then was, if you make money, you got it too good, and we're going to make sure that you don't have it that good so that you don't make money. And with Eastern, they were very successful. That's a fact. That's an absolute fact. Their theory then, and you can look in the history books, the theory of the CAB was, if you are strong and you're making money, you need more competition. If you're a weak carrier, they're going to give you all the plush routes, and they're going to put you on routes that were developed by other carriers and so on and so forth to bring you up. They wanted everybody to be equal. Well, in the process, they did a little overkill with Eastern, in my opinion. They put too much competition on our routes, too many airlines on particular routes, and so on, and it weakened Eastern. It weakened us severely. By 1963, when Floyd Hall came on board, the airline was extremely weak because of this reverse prejudice, you might say, by the CAB. And as a matter of fact, I remember when Mr. Hall came on board, and in August of 1963, I was involved in ALPA then, and we had conversations, and he told me personally, he said, in August of 63, we really don't know whether or not we can make the payroll. So it started a long time ago. It didn't start this year or last year. As the years went by, in 1963, we developed this Operation Bootstrap, where Eastern really started picking itself up by its own bootstraps, so to speak. And we had a program of Operation Bootstrap back then. We went into other programs. Finally, Frank Borman came aboard just in the latter part of 1969. He came into the picture. He came on board as a senior vice president. And then, of course, as you well know, he progressed up to the presidency and the chief executive officer and chairman of the board in, I think, around 1975. In any case, when he took over, the airline had been through some very, very tough times before. When he first got the airline as chief executive officer, he and I had a conversation, and he told me his comment, I can remember it vividly, at the Miami Springs Villas one night, was, "Bob, I've got a tiger by the tail," because the fact that the airline had such severe financial problems, and the employees were disgruntled and unhappy, and so on and so forth. Well, through the years, he has developed, through his leadership, we've developed various programs, the variable earnings plan and so on and so forth, and we've gotten stock, and we've done all sorts of things to try to keep the thing afloat and to try to get ahead of the power curve so that we could get this thing on a profitable track. He accomplished most of these things based on the employees' confidence in his ability. Unfortunately, the unions, one or another, and usually, I'm sorry to say, the IAM, usually was so reluctant in going along with any programs, and so, in my opinion, blind to the realities of the real world, and particularly after deregulation, that it made it so difficult, because the programs that we did become involved in, the unions would not give the company a long enough program to make it really effective. They'd give them a year program when it would take 3 years. And consequently, when the programs didn't work out, it seemed that more and more credibility was being taken away from management, because your program didn't work out. Even though we told you you can't have your program the way you want it, the fact that it didn't work out is your fault. It isn't our fault. So that's where we are right now, you see. Right now we have a situation where the pilots, the flight attendants, the non-contracts are all in the in the pool, trying to keep this thing afloat, trying to avoid bankruptcy, trying to give the company the benefit of every doubt so that we can flourish and we can gain some long-term security. And the IAM sits out there and they say, we want our share and then some, and we don't care what happens to the company. And I think the employees are very angry about that. I know I am. And I think that Charlie Bryan is the worst thing that ever happened to Eastern Airlines and the airline industry, period. Strong enough?
Okay. You have your mind made up about that.
Well, I've seen it with my own eyes.
Yes.
This is not something that I've gotten through hearsay or second-handed. I have seen it.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the man at the board of directors. I've seen him in action, and I think he is the worst thing that ever happened to the IAM. The worst thing that ever happened to Eastern, and as I say, I'll take it a step further. I think it's the worst thing that ever happened to the industry.
Can we talk specifically about some of these things that happened that were really efforts at trying to get the company well again? One was the putting people on the board of directors.
Yeah.
Actually, the pilots and the, as I understand it, the pilots and the non-contract employees had somebody on there first. How did that come about?
Well, that was part of an agreement that one of the agreements that we were, where the company was, it was a negotiated settlement to an agreement or to a problem that the company had, wherein the company needed some concessions. And this is obviously all post-deregulation.
Mm-hmm.
So the company was trying to point out that we cannot live in a regulated atmosphere in a deregulated environment. In other words, there's simply no way that you can mix the two. Mm-hmm. And the company pointed out also that there were going to have to be some concessions. And the union said, well, we don't believe you, we don't trust you, your credibility suffers, and so on. And if we do this, we've got to have a voice and an ear on the inside. So we have to have positions on the board of directors. I personally think it's a very, very serious mistake. First of all, I have sat in on board of directors meetings, and to have labor sitting there, in some of the deliberations, I think is ludicrous. I'm labor-oriented. I'm also well aware of management's responsibilities. I don't think that you can mix the two. I think that they have different perspectives, and I just simply think that management should manage and labor should labor. Mm-hmm. And labor shouldn't manage, and management shouldn't labor. But no, the point is that there have been a lot of circumstances on the board of directors where I have sat there and thought it is ridiculous to have labor making decisions that pertain to management prerogatives on the board of directors. I just think it's ludicrous. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's any room for labor on the board of directors. But that's my own opinion. And I think Charlie Bryan, I don't think he's been effective. I don't think Callahan has been effective. I think that if there has been any influence at all exerted, it probably was the people who represent the pilots and the non-contracts. There are two representatives, Tom Boggs and Art whatever. And those people probably have had more influence because they're more attuned to operating on boards of directors.
Oh, yeah.
And they know the techniques, and they know when to speak, and they know when to shut up. And they know what is accepted, etiquette and protocol, and so on. And the labor people, they just don't know that, and consequently they lose their effectiveness. Not to mention the fact that they're in a gross minority, and regardless of what they would bring up, if they really wanted to gang up against them, you see, they have little influence anyway. I just think it's a mistake. I think there's no room for them there. Mm-hmm. I know as a labor person, I would not want to be in the board of directors. Let the board figure out how we're going to run the company, and the labor and management get together and figure out what our deal is.
Mm-hmm. The basic idea was to enhance credibility and to keep them.
That's correct.
Keep labor better informed But you feel
And I
that
don't
could
think
have
it's
been done-
worked.
You feel that could be done in other ways?
Of course.
Yeah.
First of all, I have a big problem with labor constantly challenging the credibility of management. As I say, I've been on both sides of the fence, and this time I was in the middle, and I have to say there is as much credibility on one side as there is on the other, and there's as many liars on one side as there is on the other. And there's as many people that have ulterior motivations on one side as there is on the other. So for one side to say that the other side has a monopoly on bad guys, to me is ludicrous.
Yes. We were just interrupted. You were just making the point that it could, if it's to enhance credibility and to get people better on the union side better informed, that could have been done in some other ways besides being on the board of directors.
I think positions on the board of directors, which is the ultimate decision-making management body, positions are too critical to simply have a guy sitting there verifying that the company's not out trying to shaft labor. I just think that, I don't think that's the purpose of a seat on the board of directors. I don't think that Charlie Bryan or Bob Callahan or myself or a lot of other people are, as labor representatives, have the wherewithal to contribute significantly to the deliberations of the board of directors as far as trying to manage the company. I just don't think it simply is not compatible. So that's my own opinion. I feel that it's a wasted position, and I think that I would much rather see a good, sharp thinking businessman on the board of directors than I would a labor leader, there ostensibly to protect his people's interest. I just don't see that the board of directors is the place for that.
There were some other things done. I'm just trying to tick off some of them and get your thought on them. One was that in the late summer and fall of '83, there was an effort made to bring in some outside people, outside organizations to actually look at the books, in effect, and to make that the basis of a better understanding between the three bargaining units and Eastern.
Yeah.
Do you feel that worked?
Well, it had to work. It worked. It worked. But the fact of the matter is, and again, you must think that I'm quite negative, but again, I don't think that, I think the company is foolish for getting involved in that sort of a maneuver for this reason, that the company has to operate according to the law. The company cannot, according to the law, hide assets. They cannot lie about assets. They cannot misrepresent the balance sheet. They must be audited on a yearly basis, and so on and so forth. To me, there are adequate safeguards within the law and within the required auditing procedures. There are adequate safeguards that labor can rest assured that management is not hiding assets so that they don't have to give them to labor. Now, to bring in 2 or 3 or a half a dozen outside auditing firms, outside consultants, and so on, we've spent literally millions of dollars for consultants, for the unions, to prove to the unions that we're really in as bad a shape as we say we are, you see. And again, to me, that's counterproductive. You're spending money that you can't afford to spend to prove to them that you don't have the money to spend, as you say. So it's crazy. It really is.
It's a catch-22.
It is. It's crazy. And we've spent literally tens of thousands of millions of dollars in consultant fees that we really shouldn't have spent. I just don't think that it's management's responsibility to prove on a monthly basis to labor that they're honest. I think that the law more than takes care of that. The SEC has laws, the federal government has laws, Department of Transportation, the Railway Labor Act. There are thousands of laws that pertain to corporations, their reporting procedures, I mean, salaries are published and stock reports and everything else. Very personal information by law has to be published, has to be made public every year in the annual report. And I just don't think it's fair for a labor group or any other group to say to management, you're so dishonest that we want you audited on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or something like that. I just don't think it's honest, and I think that management made a mistake by trying to soothe the labor groups by giving in to those kinds of demands. I would have said, hey, look, I'm telling you that I'm honest, and if you don't believe it, that's your problem. If you want to get and you want to pay for an outside auditing firm, I may let them come in, but I'm not going to pay for it. Mm-hmm. We paid for our own spies, our own watchdogs, and it's crazy. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have done it.
Did it change many people's mind, you think? I mean, did it convince the pilots or the flight attendants that...
well, the question, you have to go a little further with the question. Did it change any minds compared to what their opinions would have been under the normal procedures? Mm-hmm. And I have to say no. I have to say no. I don't think it convinced anybody. Now, well, let me modify that somewhat. When some of their consultants went back to them and said, hey, look, not only are they as bad off as they say they are, they're worse than that. You know, now some of that did take place, and I'm sure that that had an effect on them, you see. But as I said before, the question has to be, how much more effect did it have as compared to the normal procedures, you see, which we could have let them become privy to. All they have to do is sign confidentiality statements, and they could have looked at our books anytime they wanted to. But as I say again, I think it was stupid for the company to pay for the watchdogs that the union insisted on. But whether or not it did any good, I would say very little. I don't think that there's anybody in their right mind that did not know that under the circumstances, with deregulation, declining yields, increasing costs, and so on and so forth, nobody with 3 cells of gray matter working would think that this company was really well off. In other words, it simply is not it simply was not possible for the company to be flourishing under those conditions. So something had to be done, and I think that everybody recognized that.
It seems that the unions shift their field from time to time in their argument. Some of the time they're arguing that that there are 2 sets of books, for example.
That's not possible under the law.
Yes. And when that doesn't fly, then they might argue that, well, if you're not making money, it's poor management. Mm-hmm. You've certainly heard that argument.
Well, to some extent, I'll buy that. To some extent, I'll buy that. But let's define poor management.
Okay.
Is poor management giving labor more than you can afford to give them? You see, now if that's poor management, then I agree. And we haven't made money because of poor management. We have given labor, and I'm labor, basically. Mm-hmm. I feel as though I'm a temporary person in management. And I have no ambitions to go high in management or anything of that sort. In other words, my ambition now that the crisis is over and everything, my ambition is to go back to the line and do what I was doing before, just become a line pilot, you know. So I really have no ulterior motivation to try to ingratiate the higher ups or anything like that. In other words, I feel very free and unconstrained to speak honestly. And as far as management is concerned, if Colonel Borman made one huge mistake over the years, it was that he did not say no enough. And if that's poor management, then he's guilty. And I have to say, to some extent, it is poor management. But he happens to be a person who is very people-oriented, and he's an incurable optimist. And he always thinks, well, look, if I give them, you know, what they want, they'll help me to pay for it. And it doesn't work that way. Mm. You have to give them what you can afford. And then if you can do better later on, if you want to be benevolent, you can give them bonuses or whatever in that area. But if Frank Borman had one Achilles heel, it was simply the fact that he simply could not say no to labor. And I'm labor.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
And I've told him this for 15 or 16 years.
Yeah. Okay. It would not be a surprise to him.
No, he knows that I have told him many times. I've said, and I can quote myself, Frank, you're a lot of things. You're a hero, you're a national hero, you're an international hero, you're a celebrity, you're a historical figure, you're a tremendous leader, you've got great personality and charisma, you've got a lot of skills, he's brainy, he's a fast learner, he's probably the best chief executive officer in the airline industry today, or maybe that we've ever seen, I don't know. But you're a lot of things, Frank, but one thing you are not is a negotiator.
You were just talking about Frank Borman, and you were making the point that
Yes.
you were listing a lot of his skills and his ability.
Well, as I said, all the things I said, I think we caught most of them, that he's a magnificent leader. He's probably, as I said before, the best chief executive officer in the industry, and probably I rank him with Rickenbacker, certainly Mr. Patterson, C.R. Smith from American Airlines. I mean, Frank Borman is there. He's with them. NIROP, you name it. He's with them, and in many areas exceeds them. I think he's got more leadership ability than any of them, including Rickenbacker. But his one big fault was that he is too people-oriented to say no. Mm-hmm. And that's his one big fault. He's always trying to make an accommodation with the people so that they'll be happy. And you simply can't do that. And it's put us in a position where frequently we have made commitments, we being management, have made commitments that we simply could not come through on. And that is where the credibility gap began, you see. It was his attempt to be too good to the people. Now, is that poor management? In a way, yes. Would the people want it any differently? I don't know. I think the people of Eastern have had it as good over the years on balance. The people of Eastern have had it as good or better than any other airline in the industry. And the reason I say that is because there are times when Delta may make more money than I do, but when you look at the entire package, we have it better than Delta. To this day, Delta's sick leave doesn't even approach ours. Their retirement is not up to ours. Their fringe benefit package, generally speaking, is not up to ours, anywhere close. Northwest Airlines, their compensation and direct salary exceeds ours by a little bit, but their fringe benefit package runs 15% of payroll. Ours runs 30-some% of payroll. So you can see what the difference is, you know, and fringe benefits cost the company as much money as salaries do. So, well, at least a third as much. In other words, we figure that our salary is, if being 100%, we have a 33% fringe benefit package for the pilot group. So the point I'm making is that the Eastern people have had it pretty darn good over the years, usually at the very top of the industry. Frequently, we haven't been able to afford that kind of graciousness, or that kind of
we being managed
generosity. Yeah, because we have been, particularly since 1978, since deregulation. The fact of the matter is that Eastern Airlines has been impacted more severely and more negatively than any single airline in the country by deregulation. I'm from Chicago. Up until a year ago, United and American, they didn't even know that deregulation existed. They never heard of People's Express. They simply were not aware of the fact that this horrible thing, as far as we're concerned, to some degree anyway, this horrible thing called deregulation was a fact of life in the industry. We were impacted by it because Peoples was born and raised on the East Coast. We were impacted by 25 or 30 other airlines running up and down the East Coast through the heavily populated areas. So we knew from day one that deregulation was here. And our yields and our whole economic structure began to suffer on day one. United and American and some other airlines were out there in the Midwest and West and everybody, they didn't even know it existed. They know now because Peoples is out there. You see, Peoples is now in Chicago, it's in Denver, it's in Minneapolis, it's everywhere. And they know. And their bottom line is starting to reflect an impact by the non-union, new entrant, low-cost type carriers. We know what it is. We've been at it for years, but they're just getting a good taste of it now. So, the obvious follow-on to that would be that when you're looking in the concession area, that Eastern found it necessary to go the concessionary route with their labor people first, because our impact was first, the deregulation impact, we experienced it first, so we have to react to it first. So that's why we're kind of ahead of the pack with some of these unique and innovative programs that we've developed. And I have to say that management did come up with some pretty darn good programs. The Eastern employees own about 20 or 25% of the stock of this company, and I think they're going to make money on it, and particularly under what's in view of the fact that we've had a change here in structure, I guess you might say, with regard to the Texas Air entry. And I think that as time goes by and everybody has to posture themselves recognizing that we're going to be a tremendous competitor, I think that Eastern once again will find ourselves in the forefront of the industry because we're probably now the most important cog in the Texas Air wheel. So I think that we're going to find that we'll be ahead of the pack pretty quickly.
You're optimistic then that
very much so.
that somebody like Eastern can, in spite of generally higher wages, they can compete with somebody like Peoples.
Oh yeah, very much so. Because you see, the traveling public, while they will go for price, but when they get enough of the treatment that they would get on a Peoples, you look at the complaint ratio, complaint to compliment ratio, and Peoples is inching up toward the very top of the complaint ladder there, and people will only take that so long, and then they want to go for something a little bit better. If it costs them an extra $20, fine, but they don't want an airline that they're going to be treated like cattle, and no bag checking, no interline agreements, no this, no that. The people, stuffing them in like cattle. Sooner or later, people just say, "Hey, look, I only go on one vacation a year, and I don't want to go like a cow. I want to go like a person." So I think that there's room for a Peoples. There's also room for a full service carrier like an Eastern. And I think that the better service you give, the better off you're going to be. The more dichotomy that there is between the two airlines, the better it is for both of them.
Part of the reason, as I understand it, that Eastern has a significant debt is that its effort to modernize its fleet. Can you talk a little bit about that? And
Yeah, I don't
particularly
think
from the point of view of a pilot.
Yeah, it has become a popular saying to say that Eastern is tremendously burdened with debt. We have certainly our share of debt, no question about it. On the other hand, we also have a very, very good fleet of airplanes. Now you have a choice. You can either be debt-free, the choice that we had, you can either be debt-free and have junk flying around, antiquated airplanes, and so on and so forth, and sooner or later that impacts your bottom line. Or you can go ahead and make the commitment to go out and get airplanes, and get good airplanes, and those airplanes will pay for themselves. So the debt doesn't worry me. We're handling the debt very well. The debt is not a thing the debt is not the thing that's dragging us down. What is dragging us down is our costs as compared to other airlines, that we have to charge the same fares as a People's Express or very close to it, except our costs for labor and everything else are so much higher. So the fact of the matter, like Frank Borman has pointed out many times, people's debt on a percentage basis is much higher than ours.
Oh, is that right?
Their debt servicing runs like 7 cents on the dollar. Ours runs like 4.5. The average for the industry is probably somewhere around 3 or 3.5. So we're really not that far out of the ballpark on debt. And I think we could handle our debt very well if we had our other costs in line. Now, with the new contract that we have with the pilots, the flight attendants, and the non-contracts, these were giant steps in getting our costs in line. If the IAM has the foresight and the sense to go along with the program, this airline will be, our debt won't be a problem, our bottom line will be black, we'll make significant amounts of money, we'll be able to pay bonuses and so on and so forth, because we will have lowered our costs by $450 million a year. So all you have to do, and you know, I know that quite frequently when management people start explaining the economics of things, they get so complicated that nobody really can understand it. But to me, if you're losing $200 million a year, and you cut your cost by $450 million a year, it's a given factor that you should start making $250 a year, which is a pretty good profit in this day and age. So that's what I'm looking toward. I'm looking toward a significant improvement in bottom line, in the profit, you know. And right now we have cut our costs, even without the IAM, we've cut our costs around $300 million, a little over $300 million a year, maybe 307. And with the IAM in the barn, with us, we would cut it 450. So even without the IAM, I think we stand a chance of making a profit. Not a big profit, not the kind of profit we need to expand, and the kind of profit we need to really flourish, but we will make a profit. And I think that with the IAM working with us as opposed to against us, I think we have a chance to really make a significant profit, start the stock on the upturn, really enhance the economic viability of the company. I hope they have that. I hope they get enlightened. I don't hold out much chance for it, but I hope they do.
That's really what the issue was at the big crisis at the end of November and early March, at the board of directors meeting and so forth, that in effect caused it to be sold, that they didn't come along with the program. Is that how you see it?
The board of directors was in a very funny position, not a funny position, but a very critical position. The company could not sustain itself going along the way we were going. We have severely declining yields. After the first 6 months of 1985, which were the most profitable 6 months in the company's history, and it looked like we really had it all together, then all of a sudden, as I have mentioned in one of my letters to the pilots, we were in smooth air and we turned the seatbelt sign off a little too soon. And as soon as we turned the seatbelt sign off, everybody got up and started insisting on more money. And what had made our profit for us in the first 6 months of '85, which was lower costs, when we had an 18 or a 20% pay cut, what made that successful, all of a sudden those advantages vanished. And now we're back into our high cost structure and getting higher. That, coupled with an unbelievable drop, a dramatic drop in yields, simply put the company in a position where we wound up losing about $2 million a day. And so it became very clear to the board of directors and to anyone else that was looking at the situation, it became very clear that the company could not remain viable losing $2 million a day. So there had to be a fix. The fix was immediately lower costs. The pilots, flight attendants, and non-contracts cooperated in that effort. The IAM did not. What the board of directors had committed to was this. They had three alternatives: fix it, sell it, or go into Chapter 11, tank it. And they obviously they did not want to do number 3, because that is not an advantage to anybody. You lose control of your company, the control goes to the courts, you don't know whether you're going to make it out of it or not. There's no guarantees in Chapter 11. The second alternative, to sell it, well, you can sell it if you can find a buyer. The other alternative, to fix it, that was the most desirable one, and that's the one that the pilots, flight attendants, and non-contracts bought, lock, stock, and barrel, and the IAM did not. When the IAM did not buy it, then the company, in effect, was not fixed. It simply was not fixed. There was a partial fix, but in the eyes of the board of directors, it was not an adequate fix. So they went to option number 2, sell it. The only buyer that came forward was Frank Lorenzo and the Texas Air Group, and so consequently they sold it. So the events leading up to it were simply, and the board, like I say, the board of directors, they have a fiduciary responsibility to the stockholders, to themselves, because they're liable. If they do something that is extremely imprudent, they themselves can become personally liable. And they simply could not accept this company at losing at the rate of $2 million a day with a partial fix that looked like it couldn't do the job. The company was destined in a matter of days for Chapter 11, and the question would have to arise, in retrospect, the question would have to arise if that scenario had taken place, where they decided not to sell it, but to go with a partial fix that didn't work out, and thence into Chapter 11, thence into Chapter 7, the stockholders are going to say, why didn't you sell it when you had the chance? And consequently, you were not responsible, and you're going to be liable, you see. So the board of directors were in a position, I don't think that they wanted to strip Frank Borman of his control of this company, so to speak, and sell it to Texas Air. They didn't want to do that. It was a necessary maneuver. Mm-hmm. So again, I put the responsibility for the necessity for the sale right on the shoulders of Charlie Bryan and the IAM, because of the fact that that they simply were not agreeable to fix the company once and for all. Mm-hmm. And the man has to be blind if he cannot see the necessity for fixing it. Mm-hmm. So
can you explain him? I mean, like, how would you explain his actions during that week?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you, in my opinion, Charlie Bryan, first of all, he has an abject dislike or hate for Frank Borman personally. Now, he denies that publicly, but his actions speak louder than his words. So there is no question in my mind that he, and of course what I'm saying to you is simply my own opinion. Mm-hmm. There's no question in my mind, first of all, that he despises Frank Borman. For whatever reason, I don't know. Secondly, I really believe that he has illusions or delusions of grandeur, in that I think that he fancies himself as some sort of a top executive with Eastern Airlines, and that he is going to lead us, through the Red Sea, and he's going to lead us to the ultimate mount. Mm-hmm. I also feel that he is a political animal, to the extent that he is looking and taking a calculated risk that his membership, by virtue of not having to give up 20%, will support him in the next election. I don't think he cares one rap whether this company survives over the long haul, as long as he survives in that presidency. And frankly, I think that what he has done, and I know from the input that I get from IAM members, I think what he has done has sealed his fate as a loser in the IAM election forthcoming. So to try to explain Charlie Bryan, I can't explain him. The man is either abjectly stupid, blind, or he has some motivation that blinds his sense of reality. Because anybody who cannot see what is going on in the real world with regard to our company and its necessity and the necessity for lowering costs, anybody who can't see that is there's something wrong with him. He's blind, he's dumb, he's deaf, he's whatever. Mm-hmm. He's got a problem. And I think that there's probably, the answer to your question is, there are a combination of factors. There is a combination of factors that probably would describe Charlie Bryan. I think that he's got blind ambition. I think that he's got political problems. I think that he's got a certain amount of hate, and I think when you mix this all together, you get a very unreasonable individual.
There was a point a couple rounds of negotiations ago when, and I just lost the date. I can't say it right now. When in the spring of the year, there was building toward a confrontation with the machinists.
83.
Mm-hmm. And there was an intention, it seemed, on the part of most other employees to take them on. Can you talk a little about that?
Yes. In 1983, the company and the IAM were reaching a loggerhead. Excuse me. And the rest of the company were more or less observers in this fiasco. They saw on the one side an irrational, unreasonable, demanding Little Caesar. On the other side, they saw the company who simply was not in a position to acquiesce to the demands of this person and his group. Consequently, the people, almost to a person, immediately gravitated toward the company's position and said, hold out, don't give in. If they go on strike, we'll throw bags, we'll do whatever we have to do to keep the airline flying. And I think probably in my entire 29-year career, that this probably was the most together group of people that I've ever seen. They just simply, they wanted the IAM to go out on strike and let them do their devastation, because every time they go on strike, they damage equipment and so on and so forth, which I wouldn't put up with. I would take them to court, and I would fine the union, and I would do whatever. I would sue the union and sue Charlie Bryan and sue anybody else if there was one piece of equipment damaged. I don't know why we don't do that. But anyway, the fact of the matter is that the other employees, almost to 100%, were willing to take up the slack where the IAM left when they walked off. When it came to midnight, Frank Borman had a decision to make. he was informed by the board of directors that we had enough cash to last us, I think it was something like 9 days, maybe it was 12, but I think it was 9 days, before we would have to file bankruptcy. In other words, what I'm saying is we did not have the resources really to take on a strike. But the decision was made by Colonel Borman, and I'm sure he's revisited this decision 1,000 times, in conjunction with consultations with the board of directors. The decision was made to give in to the IAM, because we only had, if we did not give in, regardless of the well-intentioned good intentions of the other employees, that they would throw bags, that they would fuel airplanes, that they would do these things, you know, we just simply could not survive beyond 9 days. So a little over a week later, we would have to shut the company down and go into bankruptcy. Borman was simply not prepared to take that step at the time, because he feels, even today, that that would have been the end of the company, simply. And while it was a very tough decision to make, I'm sure I would not have wanted to make it. It was a tough decision to make. The fact of the matter is, he made the decision. He decided that he was going to cave into them. He knew the repercussions. He knew that he was going to be called names and a traitor and so on and so forth by other people who didn't really understand the situation. He knew that, but he made the decision anyway. And the company did survive. We didn't prosper, but we did survive. And we haven't prospered again over the years because of the fact that we have had to give in too many times, because we have not had the wherewithal to take a stand and say, we cannot give you that. We simply can't afford it. If you want to strike, strike. We have not had that option, and it's unfortunate. So,
was there a feeling in the spring of '83 when that happened that the concessions, productivity improvements, and other things that had been made by the flight attendants and the pilots over the preceding year or two, that those were really, that savings was passed on to the machinists?
Without a doubt. As a matter of fact, specifically the pilots, who they gave up pay raises and everything else. They are absolutely convinced, and it may very well be true, that they subsidized the cave-in to the IAM, and it has created a lot of bitterness, no question about it. The flight attendants, they came out a little better because they wound up with a raise also. And when it came to the wage investment program, it seems as though everybody was giving their 18% or their 20% or whatever they gave from an elevated position, and the pilots were giving it from a depressed position. And consequently, the pilots felt again that they were being shafted. And that's one of the reasons that we have had so much difficulty with the pilots throughout this last contract negotiation, because they felt like they have more than given their share, and they were just getting a little bit tired of subsidizing the IAM. However, here we are once again, not only the pilots, but the flight attendants and their non-contracts, once again subsidizing the IAM's inflated contract. So it's not going to go well for the IAM in the long haul, I'll tell you right now.
The question of productivity, which is sort of the other way of causing savings. Have the pilots particularly over this crisis period here since deregulation, have they done things in their contract and work practices that have increased productivity?
Oh yeah, when you compare our duty rigs in 1978 with what our duty rigs are today, you can see gross amounts of productivity and utilization improvements. A big step, I can give you some statistics, we have probably had, let's see, it would be at least just over this last contract alone, you're going to see an improvement of 5 hours a month, close to 5 hours a month per pilot in increased utilization. Now that's a lot of utilization. 1 hour is a lot, but 5 hours is an unbelievable amount. The contract that we're working under right now, that we just negotiated right now, is about as good a contract as you will find in the industry with regard to a major airline. I don't know of any airline that has as good a contract as management has with the Eastern pilots.
Oh, yeah.
I think also that under the circumstances that the pilots came out very well. Their sick leave is still in place. Their retirement is basically in place, with very, very minor modifications that don't affect them as much as it affects new hires. They're going to work harder. They're going to make a little less money because of the 20% give back. However, it certainly beats the alternative,
Which is
bankruptcy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the flight attendants as an organization?
Well, that's really not my bailiwick. However, I am a very close observer of the flight attendants. I think the flight attendants union is confused. I think they lack leadership. I think that by virtue of the fact that again, there is a great deal of a lack of interest by the membership in the union, other than in crisis times. It just seems that historically the flight attendants union has been a group that is controlled by a half a dozen or maybe 12 or 15 people that control the 6,000 or 7,000 out there. They don't have any choice as to membership. They have to belong. They at least have to pay dues. They have an agency shop arrangement. They have to pay dues, so they have the economic strength, the union that is. As I say, in observing them, I think that their common sense approach to doing business leaves a lot to be desired. They're inconsistent. They seem to be reluctant to make decisions. They can't get together, even in the hierarchy. They can't seem to agree on anything. Consequently, it's a very difficult union to deal with, because when you make a deal and you shake hands on a deal, and then you find out a day later or 2 days later that you actually don't have a deal, that really makes it difficult.
Yes,
Where do you start again now? And that happened 7 or 8 times in this negotiation, where they thought they had a deal, and then they found later that they didn't have a deal. And so as far as the flight attendants are concerned, I think our flight attendants have historically been right at the top of the pay structure in the industry. I think that they've had good working conditions. I really think that that they probably didn't realize when they turned down the original contract, they didn't realize that it was probably about as good a deal as they were ever going to look at in the future. And I think they painted themselves into a corner by virtue of rejecting that contract, and they wound up in limbo. They wound up in a situation where there really wasn't anywhere else to go. And consequently, they forced themselves into a strike situation, which they didn't pull off. The company imposed an agreement which nobody was happy with, including the company, and it created a lot of animosity. But I think in the final analysis, the flight attendants came out okay. I don't think they're too unhappy now, and I have no question in my mind that they will ratify this agreement.
You feel they will?
Overwhelmingly, yeah. If they don't, they better be examined by shrinks, one by one.
In your current job, you get into negotiations with the pilots?
Yes. And I try to stay out of it as much as possible, but as it occurred this time, on the final day, I did get involved. And the reason that I did is because it was mandatory that somebody be there to keep things moving, and that could speak in a manner that, well, my chief negotiator, who is also vice president, he really has the authority to speak for the company, but by the same token, you know, he was, by nature, he is reluctant to make sweeping decisions that might be controversial with management. In other words, what I'm saying is that he has a certain latitude, and he knows that he must stay within that latitude.
Mm-hmm.
The latitude that I have is something a little bit more than his. And of course, as you go up the ladder and you get to crank foreman, the latitude is even more than that.
Right.
But I went in the negotiations on the last day, and we did finally, after a full day of negotiating, we did finally iron out the most of the differences we had. And the MEC took the proposal that we made, which in effect was our last proposal because of the time constraints that we had. They took the proposal and they ratified it in the final analysis. And it's a good deal for everybody.
Mm-hmm. I take it that in dealing with ALPA, the fact that you're a pilot probably helps.
Oh, there's no question about it. There's no question about it. Pilots are very, well, I won't say funny people, but they very much cherish the pilot input to management.
Mm-hmm.
And while some companies have, as vice president of flight operations, a non-pilot, my title really is vice president of flight operations and system chief pilot. So I am their chief pilot. I'm their direct boss, so to speak, or their ultimate boss. And that means something to them. I think that it means that when I talk to management, and it means something to me too, because when I talk to management, or whenever my input is sought, or whenever I decide to get involved in conversation or in whatever happens to be going down at the table of the senior staff, I speak from the vantage point of a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And frequently I find myself defending pilots and their positions. And there are a lot of aspects of the profession and so on, and the attitudes of pilots that people don't understand. Mm-hmm. And only a pilot can explain it. So I think it's important, in view of the fact that the pilots are one of the most important labor groups in the industry, in the corporation certainly, that there is a pilot who has a pretty good lofty position from which to speak to top management. Mm-hmm. And I think that that the union recognizes that, the pilots recognize it, and they approve of it. And we do have a good rapport. I do have a good rapport with the union hierarchy and the representatives for the most part.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We've had our differences, but we have a rapport.
Mm-hmm. I take it that Borman's rapport with pilots is based on his having been one.
It helps a great deal, yeah, because he knows, and he's been there on a dark and stormy night, you know, when all the money in the world could not buy your skill and ability if you were negotiating on at that particular moment. So he knows what he's been there. He knows what it's like. And I think that the pilots respect him for that. They know that when he's talking to them with a knowledge, with an attitude that is simply unavailable to people who have not been in the situations that pilots have been in. Mm-hmm. So I think from that standpoint, they respect his opinions.
Mm-hmm. In effect, because he has a capacity to respect them.
Yeah,
as pilots.
right. And he knows what they do. He knows what they do, and they know what he has done, and
okay.
So there's a mutual respect.
Yeah. In all of this, since the summer of '83, we're almost at the end of the tape, so I'm going to stop as soon as this is my last question.
Yeah, okay.
What has Bill Usry done in this, as far as you can see? What's his role been?
Well, Bill Usry in my opinion, is probably the best in the world at doing what he does. Bill is the ultimate mediator, really. He is, I don't like to say deal maker because that sounds like it maybe has a negative connotation, but I certainly don't mean it in any sense of the word as a negative. He is a guy who can take diverse opinions, diverse positions, and somehow bring them into an arena that everyone can operate in. And he has a certain knack of coming up with a key to getting people together. And I think that he has been very, very important in both in an advisory capacity and also in a capacity of actually getting the parties together under circumstances that I thought were probably impossible. Somehow or other, he put it together, and it helped a great deal. So I think that whatever, I don't even know what they pay Bill or what they have paid Bill as a consultant, whatever it is, I think that he's worth 2 or 3 times that.
Let me pause.